G'day, listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Scouting Australia podcast, powered by Australian Property Scout Buyers Agency. I'm your host, Sammy Gordon, and I am joined once again in the studio by the man from Mordor, Mr. Jimmy Ibrahim himself. Mate, how are you? Welcome back to the Sunshine State.
Thank you very much, Sammy. G'day, listeners. It is always a delight to be up here. Good to see you. I like our studio. It feels like the Bat Cave. We're all in black,
mate.
We are all in black with a black backdrop.
We got the matte black Ferrari downstairs.
Yep.
It's
got
all
black
happening.
T-shirts.
There we go.
But there's going to be a lot of light on today's podcast.
Ooh,
you like that?
nice
Listen up. I've got a few for you for today.
Who are you listening to for content?
Well, the thing that I'm really impressed today, ladies and gentlemen, when you're listening, you're driving to work, whatever you're doing, there's not very often that Sammy, the bull shark over there, listens to Jimmy's suggestions. And Sammy, he loves, he's a man of routine. He loves his Q&A episodes. I said, Sammy, we need to theme the Q&A. We need to make it specific to a topic.
Would you like a trophy?
So I would like something other than some Powerade that I got at the end of last year.
I got some backwash Gatorade in the car, mate. I'll FPOS it up to you.
Thank you very
FPOS,
much.
Express Post. What's that?
But the FPOS, Vimo. But the good news is we are going to actually theme some of the Q&As, and today's all about cash flow because
it's due to the level of Q&A, like questions
100%.
that are being sent in. So there's huge
100%. level,
and we're picking out all the questions, and we were going through it all this morning, compiling a nice little list, and Jimmy's like, mate, first great idea in about, well, how many have I known you? 4 years now. Yeah, that's it. First great topic, mate, and idea with this.
Thank you.
But I like it, mate. I like it, grouping the questions into like a very similar sort of, style of conversation so we can kind of smash through this and people can get a really good learning out of different topics in general, man.
Yes.
So, mate, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it.
Now, knowing you as well as I do, I was going to throw in a bit of a curveball off the top just to get you rolled up, just to get a bit of a pulse check as to has Sammy eaten his Weet Bix? Has he eaten his Weet Bix today? Because one of the questions, I have to mention this, but someone wrote in and just said, what to do with 300,000? And I thought, if you want to put a red flag to a bull, then you throw in 4 or 5 words and just say, help me. And I thought, would that rile you up? Would that get you going? Mate. Just to get your just to get the blood pumping a little bit. So I'm expecting a big episode.
This morning, so I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good.
But if we can say to the people, if you are going to write something in as a question, come on.
If you write in something as simple as that, it's not like it's just there's simple. There's you, and then there's that question. You know what I mean? Like it's not getting an answer.
Yeah,
you got to give us a bit of context, a bit of background. Like that's there's no ziz, there's no good.
But also,
let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on. Okay.
Yeah. I'm not even going to get fired up because it's that dumb.
All right. We're just trying to see where you're standing. Let's just get you fired up a little bit. Let's move in. And I usually save Anons to the end, but I'm going to kick it off straight off the top. Because normally the Anons fire you up. But this is actually quite a sensible question. So our first question from Anon today is, Sammy boy, speaking of cash flow, what is the lowest price for a high growth and high cash flow property?
Did we even tell everyone that the Q&A was specifically around cash flow?
We did.
Did we?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, we said it was themed.
We said it was themed. Did we say what the theme was?
We said it was all about the cash. Robbo. It's all about the cash flow, especially because interest rates the way that they are, everyone's a bit nervous about their cash flow. So we thought, let's hit it on the head.
And I think it is a great point because we were kind of pulling apart all these questions this morning and starting to run through it all.
100%.
And we'll go on, there's so many questions here around it. It's super, super relevant at the moment. Interest rates are super high. We've maybe got another 12 months to kind of tackle this thing and get through it before we start seeing some good cutbacks and starting to come down and easing of those interest rates. So how can people get themselves through? How can they start to, bulletproof the portfolio from a cash flow sense?
Yeah.
Hence why we thought this would be good. Let's group them all together. Yep. Kick off the year with a good app around this, and yeah, man, let's dive into it.
So just to set the foundation. Anon's actually basically said, what's the lowest price for a high growth and also a high cash flow property, which is going to lead because he's running low on cash. Okay. Right? So can we tackle each of those just off the top?
So he's not talking about a combined high growth, high cash flow deal. He's talking about one of each.
Yeah, we're going to start with one of each.
Okay.
And then we'll combine and see if that's possible.
Okay.
So
Look, you can still at the moment you can still buy around say 300 grand for a good growth asset. It is getting a lot tighter and a lot harder. If your budget's up closer to 400 grand, you are able to get a lot higher quality asset, better area, all the rest of sort of stuff. We're seeing great opportunity at the moment in the kind of $500,000 to $600,000 markets as well. There's some really good potential in those sorts of markets. The affordable locations have been on a pretty good run for the last especially the last 12 months, 24 months with interest rates and whatnot too. So. From a growth perspective, was the primary question there was like, what's the lowest entry price?
Yeah, lowest price.
You can still get in. If you're looking at like full basic bare entry sort of entry price, you're kind of typically looking around about that 300 grand. Still going to get you a good asset. We're still getting opportunities in the 200s, but it's becoming very slim pickings.
Yep.
And so the suggestion would be, if you got the ability to spend a little bit more, get yourself even just a little into the threes as a minimum, you're going to get a better quality asset, and you're probably going to get maybe slightly better suburb market and whatnot as well.
Perfect. So that covers that. We're going to talk all cash from now on.
Yes.
High cash flow property then.
Yes. This is where it kind of really depends like what we're chasing here, right? So like it was funny, just before we jumped on this, I was on the phone to one of the boys, one of the BAs in the team, Big Paulie, and we were talking about a duplex that he had on the go. $500,000 purchase price, a nice little discount on the way in. It was hovering around about that very high sevens, just to a low 8% yield on something like that as well. That was a duplex in a good, strong regional hub. Now that sort of stuff doesn't come through every day, sort of thing, but that is kind of like your entry level. And that is especially like ready to go sort of style cash flow deal. They're pretty rare, but these days, right? But that's kind of like your typically your bare basic entry cash flow deal. If you want something set up, established, ready to go, you typically need at least about 500,000, especially for something like that. That was a good deal. Well done, Paulie. The other side of things is you might be looking at deals maybe around 350, 400,000 to buy yourself a site, get yourself a really nice granny site for around that sort of money. Maybe older home, bigger block, good site access, or corner block, something like that. Build yourself a granny at the back. For those sorts of things, as I was saying there, you're kind of looking at 350, 400,000. And then it depends what you build on the back end. So if Anon here is going in, and needing to go to fully scrape the barrel and go as cheap as we can, he's probably looking 350K entry price in terms of purchase.
Yep.
And then you're probably building prefab, mid 100s, 150, 160, something like that for your lowest entry price. I still would probably say like your bare minimum realistically is probably around about that 500 grand. You probably could scrape in slightly under, with that example there. But your best sort of examples and results would, in my opinion, be starting from around about that 500 grand mark.
And what's the kind of return on that in terms of the yield, or what kind of rent in terms of dollar figure would people expect after they've executed that?
Something like that, you'd be sitting at those similar sort of yields, to the previous one as well. So you're probably sitting on something like that. Like if we were talking the full bottom end of it, you're probably still talking, $700 a week plus. If you're spending 500 on a deal like that, 550, you're probably stretching towards $800 a week as well. So we're still hitting, depending on where you are and depending on what you're building. If you're building a higher spec granny, maybe brick on slab with a pitched roof, things like that. So you're probably going to get more. You're obviously going to get more longevity out of it, and it's going to rent for more. But your yield overall is going to be lower because it's going to cost you more. At the moment, that style of product is costing $230, $240, but it's essentially a small house. But yeah, those yields on things like that might be in the low sevens. But the cash flow might be similar. But if they're paid off because you've paid more, it's actually more from a net cash flow perspective. Okay. But it just depends what the aim of the game is and what you're trying to achieve. If you need something to keep the oxygen flowing in the portfolio and you're Anon here with the absolute bare basics, what can I afford? Maybe that is that full entry level purchase price at let's say around 350, prefabbing for 150, and that's getting you through for now as your portfolio starts to compound. And maybe you're doing the bigger, juicier builds. Further down the track in the portfolio as well.
Because what you're talking about is the preservation of your capital, right?
Yes.
If he hasn't got a lot of capital, then clearly he can't spend $230 on a granny because he's not going to be able to build it. And he's not going to be able to go again, right? So really important point there for you, Anon. And he's actually added another point A, like a little sub question.
Ooh.
He wanted to just leverage as much time.
Okay, so here we go.
And he's saying, well, Sammy, I appreciate what you're saying, but can you still generate that kind of cash flow in this high interest rate environment?
What sort of cash flow?
Well, you're saying, can you generate cash flow?
Yes, you can.
Yes.
But I think this is where it's always relevant, right? It's always like relevant and relative to the time of the market that we're in right now. Like obviously, if you go out there and buy a duplex, like I was talking about there, Paulie's example deal, 500 grand renting for that, you're probably sitting at maybe 4 or 5 grand a year net passive on something like that. But if you went out and prefabbed for the same money, you're going to have a slightly higher net return because you're going and executing it yourself. And they're probably slightly easier deals longer to execute, but an easier deal to source, if that makes sense. There's a bit more stock around that style of product. Something like that, you might be sitting at maybe $6,000 to $8,000 per annum net passive. But that same example with the brick granny, it might be, it probably would sit similar, but if they were paid out, the brick one might be, because the brick granny in this scenario might rent for a bit more, $470, $480 a week, as opposed to the prefab at $400. Your net cash flow at the very back end of it could be substantially higher as well. So, I guess to answer his specific question, the answer is definitely still yes, but you have to take it with a pinch of salt because, like, when you and I were first doing deals, man, the cash flows were 20 to 25 grand per annum net passive per deal and a 90% LVR, but interest rates are at 2.5%, 3%. Like we used to run them at a 3% when we'd send them out, but interest rates at the time you were getting them sub 2.5%. Now we're talking about 6% plus rates, and yes, in the next. At some point in the next 12 months, we're probably going to see that starting to ease, which is going to help and start to boost it. But what I would say to people is not be fixated on, well, it's only like, a couple of grand or 5 grand a year positive or whatever it is right now. What is going to happen maybe if interest rates are back 1%? And over time, when debt is reduced by maybe $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 on these deals as well, that's the thing that I would really focus on. And if it's allowing you to continue building the portfolio, you got to look at it as the oxygen of the portfolio and the lifeblood. It keeps it going. Yeah, it keeps it going. It's not so much about, I want an extra 10, 15 grand a year for a holiday. It's if that's your idea of a cash flow deal, you throw that thing straight out the window. It's all about keeping the portfolio moving. It's the oxygen, the lifeblood of the portfolio.
You've been reading the bloody questions, haven't you?
You have
preempted my question. You've got ahead of yourself.
I haven't. I actually haven't read it. You mentioned something about that
I was actually writing a comment there because, folks, I did actually 3 years ago when Sammy, we bought a cash flow deal.
Is this your question now?
You're going to go straight into yours. I threw it in.
Or you're going to leave it for later? Are you going to hook people?
Well, because,
Amateur.
I will leave it till a bit later on. But Sammy's been reading the notes here. I try and stump him with these questions.
Lucky we've got a producer here that pulls you up for your bullshit and keeps you on track. So keep the hooks in.
Just going back to some serious stuff while you dribble on. What jumped out at me then was a very important point for people listening is you mentioned a whole bunch of different cash flow. You're doing duplex, you're doing it yourself and understanding the differences and different price points. There's a lot of nuances. Jimmy. There's a lot of nuances with all of those. And if you just think cash flow as one broad spectrum here, you're missing the point.
And there's so many different avenues for it, and it really depends. Like, where's people's skill sets? Do they just want to be passive? Are they happy for a project to be managed? All this sort of thing as well. There's so many different components to it. Man.
But you being with Australian Property Scout and the strategy side of things, guiding someone on that nuance of each of those decisions can actually save them a whole bunch of money, but also get them into another deal just by changing the difference in whether they went for the duplex.
Of course. Yeah, and sometimes like I've had clients come to me before and they go, look, man, I've got like 800 grand. And this was, this is still possible now, right? It's not something I'd probably try and push someone to so much now, but like I've got 800 grand to do a deal. Let's go buy, a granny site at, 550, 600,000 and we'll build the 200, 250K granny on it. But if that was all the borrowing capacity that they had, and then they were kind of maxed and tapped after that, that isn't the strategy I would go for. I'd go, mate, let's swap that strategy. Let's carve off 300 grand of that in that situation. All right, we're going to be running very close to the line of what's possible here because I'm talking about 800. Yeah. But let's talk about the example at 800. You could carve 300 grand off here and go and buy yourself a nice, solid little bread and butter, make a discount on the way in, buy in the right market, let it do its heavy lifting. Yep. You buy that at the same time you buy a cash flow deal for 300, 350, let's say buy the cash flow deal for 350 and you're building a prefabber on it for a 150 or whatever. For the same cost as the one big bopper. And in the long term, we want the big bopper style deals because the higher net cash flow, it's like you're going to get more from a singular deal. But in this example, knocking that over, if you bought them both at the same time, and let's say you let's say you bought it now, right? We're in March or whatever in now. Let's say you were to buy that and buy them both at the same time. Let's say you execute the prefab strategy by the end of the year. All right, no worries. We've got some good cash flow coming in. I'm going to go back in now and I'm going to tap equity. A lot of the time, your granny deals, they don't always value up like heaps higher. Valuers can sometimes be a little stumped with grannies. They may not have comparables. So they might, especially if they don't have many comparables, they may value them a little bit lower. Or just value them at the purchase plus build price. You might not have equity. But in that example, we've also gone out and bought a bread and butter for 300, 350 that we bought at a discount and we bought in the right market and has now grown. So that now has given us our ability to go, well, we're going to harvest the equity from that. We've got the cash flow that can absorb a bit of an equity release, costs, of doing business there. We're going to release some equity, and that allows us to kind of jump into the next deal, keep pushing forward and moving forward.
I love that.
That's the way I probably would look at it and carve up from that side. A lot of people go, I've got 800 grand on a deal, let's go punch it. And then they go get it done, and then they're going, where's my equity? I'm out of equity. And we've got to wait for the market to kind of grow at a really nice level. Because, a lot of people have got to realize primarily these are here for cash flow. Yes, they will grow over time. We buy them in the right locations. We buy it for good money. We build for good money, and all the rest of it. But ultimately, they're cash flow deals, and valuers will typically value as conservatively as they can on those products.
And also, a lot of people who own these aren't selling them for the comparable sales stock, right? So that's 100%. Why that's the reason why there's not a lot of comparable.
Yeah, and like if someone set this up properly, there's typically never any real reason to sell them. You don't see much of this stock ever really coming up that's well set up. Sometimes you see crappy ones come through and they haven't been set up nicely, or they're right at the back and there's not great access. But if they're set up properly, man, they very, very rarely get sold. So if the only ones that have sold are the crap ones, you got a lower comparable for what your product might actually be.
Yes. All right.
But what's the value? Well. But what's a valuer going to do, man? Just to finish on that, a valuer is going to take the most conservative option 100%. They can. They're going to take that, not go, well, yours is heaps nicer. Yeah, you're renting it from all the rest of it. They're not going to go, we're going to give you an extra 100 grand for that. Extremely rare. The market conditions would have to be so favorable for him to do it. He's going to cover his ass. He's going to go, mate, these are the only comparables I've got. Yeah, they're not as good as yours, but they're all I've got.
Yes.
That's your comparable.
And we're not going to go into the dual asset accumulation, but that just typifies why you would be buying two types of assets, the growth and the cash flow.
Yeah.
So,
but let's stick down the cash flow.
You've done well,
mate.
Sammy. You've done well. Good start. Hopefully you don't have a weak finish, but I'll give you the opportunity.
No one has ever called me similar to you, mate, and I don't intend to prove it today.
Speaking of granny flats, this is the next question. This is from Caroline G. She said, Sammy boy, when building a granny flat, how do you protect yourself with the builder in case a massive construction delay impacts the cash flow and also impacts your ability to purchase the next property? How do you protect yourself against that?
Mate, I'm going to throw this back to you because I know you've done a bit of this stuff as well, and I'd love to know what comes to mind for you from this side, and then I'm going to throw some other juicy stuff on top.
Well, in terms of protecting yourself to the builder, well, first of all, it's the integrity of who are you using? Are you using Joe Blow down the road, or who have you been referred to this person, and what is their capacity to build? So the confidence that I had buying and building through you when you coordinated it was trusted, and it was through you, and I backed your expertise.
Yeah.
So I put
our team.
And I put a lot of faith in you. I know our team, Australian Property Scouts, built out, and there's a project management team. So in terms of mitigating the risk, there's obviously a lot less exposure in terms of that. So it is very much why you're spending that kind of money. That is probably the biggest thing I'd be leveraging on that support.
Yeah, taking recommendations from someone that's done that has done or has worked with that person before and can actually vouch for them and say yes, they've done a good job, or they are good operators. So always when we're doing this thing, we're always negotiating, working with different builders until typically we find some people, and normally I'll always be the test dummy. I'll run a couple of deals 100%. First and run them through from that side as well. But yeah, man, we always try and get the strongest price we can, the sharpest price that we can get for our clients on the best possible product. And you and I are both, full well that I'm always designing and tweaking, and I've got some pretty awesome designs now, but I was always working with different designs and coming up with the sharpest and the best things that we could. So that's what people really get to leverage. The other thing I'll kind of throw in on that as well, because I agree with you completely on all those points there. But man, I think the big thing that, like, when you start getting into bigger developments and you're getting into when you're building this style of product, a lot of the time you kind of want to work with more of a specky sort of style builder. And so your specky builders might be the big names that you might know in a particular state. So for Australia-wide, a lot of people would know, say, a Metricon or a GJ Gardner or a McDonald Jones, all those sorts of guys. To an extent, they're specky builders, right? But really, Metricon definitely are. You kind of big volume players that typically still build a decent product, but they're kind of more targeted towards kind of more the affordable and middle ring. They're not going a lot of the time for the really top end sort of stuff. They're building more volume at that sort of level. Now, the volume allows them to be very sharp with pricing and generally to have a really good product as well. They're normally reasonably insulated from too much going on. I say that Metricon did come quite close to going under. A little bit of a too big to fail sort of situation there, but what I found a lot of the time is those sorts of builders can give you the best quality product at the sharpest pricing. I'm not saying any of those builders that I mentioned, I obviously have no affiliations with any of them. I'm not saying you should go with any of those builders in particular. I'm giving examples of the style of builder that you could try and work with. Now, what we've always found is when I can work with a good, solid builder that is similar to that, and maybe not quite on that size or space, the important thing to note is with that style of builder, talk about something called liquidated damages. You can never get that sort of stuff in with a volume builder like that, because if they did volume at that, now liquidated damages is, let's say you have a build contract of 20 weeks, and then you go to 21 weeks and they've used up all their wet days and all the rest of the stuff. As soon as you start going over, the liquidated damages is how much they have to pay you for how far they go over. So it might be, on a little build, I don't know, for example, the equivalent to rent per week. So on a standard granny, it might be $450 a week that they would have to pay you as liquidated damages. What's important to note is it's especially in the current building environment, it's almost impossible to get any of that sort of stuff into contracts these days. So people will talk about, just get liquidated damages in your contracts. And back in the day, especially pre-COVID, it was definitely possible, but not so much with those volume style players where you will get the sharpest pricing because their margins are so slim. If something blows out on their end and they have to try and complete a project at a certain amount, it doesn't work, and that's where builders can go under. With your bigger sort of style builders, that is what you can get in. And I think in the next couple of years, as the building crisis eases, which we've got a few years before that plays out, that sort of thing might start to come in. But there's a lot of people that try and negotiate on things like liquidated damages and get them put into contracts these days. They're literally virtually impossible to get into build contracts these days. So the biggest thing that I would say is like how to pick your builder in this sort of scenario for something like this is go with someone reputable, someone that's been recommended to you, that is a vouch product, that person has worked with them before, and maybe you can get through and see some finished products, see what it looked like. If you could speak to an old owner or something about how long it took, how long the project took as well, that's probably what I'd be looking for. And obviously your normal things of reviewing those builders online and whatnot, those little checks.
One thing that really impressed me when working with you about this, especially early days, was your dealing with these builders and these builders understanding that you're not going to refer them clients if they're not going to deliver on what they said they're going to deliver. So obviously when they are building out their scaling out and building more product, you were always pushing them to make sure that they could deliver on that.
Yeah, of course.
So they would never get too big to the detriment of the client. Otherwise you just say, well, we're not going to...
Yeah, we've got to stop the business.
And that's a really important point there. So why would they burn... APS in your relationship?
100%.
So I think that's what was a really big thing for me.
100%.
And speaking about the spec type builders, it was interesting because I had a call the other week with a couple, and the lady, she was an architect. We're talking about this granny flats, and she's like, "Oh, I'd like to design the granny." And I went, "Why?" Because I could tell she had all these great ideas and the emotion of it. And I was like, you're never going to live in this place. This is all about the numbers.
100%.
So why spend an extra 50 grand for,
trying to build
what?
Something amazing. And this is the thing, man. She's talking about doing something like a custom build.
That's right.
Whereas if you want to do a product where someone's able to smash that thing out of volume, so they can order, they can just generate everything exactly the same, 100 pieces or 50 pieces of that product every year, so they can get a bulk price on it, so then they can sharpen it up for you. And deliver a really great product consistently. As soon as you start going outside of that box,
why would you?
But why would you go away from, especially if something's a proven design? So you know the way that I work, I've typically got, it depends on the site, but I've got about 3 or 4 two-bedders that we use a lot, and then a couple of others that kind of fit either side of that two-bedroom sort of design, but that we use in volume because it works. You know, it really, really works. It's not like we're building 200 of exactly the same product in one area, you know, and flooding it with the same area. Obviously, we don't do anything like that at all, but it's having really, really high-quality products that is a proven performer and then rolling that out on your property.
It's
Don't
the
try
emotion,
and reinvent
right?
the wheel, man. Like, just build what is going to get you the return.
The numbers. And I suppose worst case scenario, if it is delayed, like in this particular question from Caroline, if we're going to be holding this potentially forever, that is not that bad. Like, put in a context of what we're trying to do.
I think everyone needs to put into context how real the building crisis is. So, like, it's not like everyone's just talking about it and it's a thing. It is bad, right? And it's across the board. Builders that I used to build me grannies in 10 weeks, it turned into 25 to 30 weeks because they couldn't get material. And it's just part of the game right now. If that's a product you need in your portfolio, and long term, you know, it takes an extra, let's say 3, 4, 6 months to get built over what you thought it was going to get done. Long term, it's going to pay you back so many times over. But realistically, it is part of the process now. Obviously, we try and mitigate it as much as possible. But realistically, if it's a good builder and they've done everything right from all their sides, but they're waiting on materials or they're waiting on trades because there's a limited trade shortage as well, you still got to be understanding on that side as well. I feel the pain though, because it is painful. It is a hard thing. But one of the cool things, like how to mitigate this side of things and mitigate the cost exposure of it as well, is everyone has to remember is, let's say you're building with a construction loan. Yeah. So construction loan gets released in stages. So yes, as it starts to go through the stages, it will cost more the longer it goes with no income on that side. What everyone's got to remember is 99 times out of 100, you're renting the front house out at the same time the rear one's being built. So you still have income coming in. You know, and a lot of the time, you don't even need to drop the rent, or you might slightly drop the rent. It depends how hot that market is at the time. But as long as you, safely fence off that granny yard, you might even throw the colour bond up straight away and get it fenced off. So it's not going to change after that point. You go through that, and that is done and set up, and it's all good. Then you're sweet, and it's good, and you still got that rent coming in. So yes, it might blow out by a little bit, but you've still got the rent coming in. You know, keeping your head above water, essentially.
And those questions are so common. Those questions, and I had a whole bunch of them. I was like, oh, hold on a minute. So how are we building this? Like, what happens?
Yeah.
So that's the thing I love about the project management team is they stage it the whole thing. So if you didn't want to do anything, this is what we're going to do. We're going to rent out the front house.
Yep.
At a certain point, we're going to fence it off.
Yep.
Then we're going to start building. We're going to look after the front tenant.
Yeah, 100%.
We're going to do everything stage by stage to make sure that you mitigate all your risks. So hopefully that answers your question. I think we pretty much nailed that one for Caroline. All right, moving on to question number 3 from Maddie J. Sammy, when you reach the debt reduction stage of your portfolio, do you recommend to carry some level of debt across your cash flow properties, or aim to clear the debt entirely to achieve highest amount of cash flow for passive income?
This man's name is Matty
J.
Big Matty!
Do you know Matty J?
I don't know who Matty J is. I don't know the J, but that's a great question.
That's
why
I'm
giving it a big shout out. It's a great question. It is. Mate, I love the question because my answer to that is yes, I will always aim to leave a level of debt on it. So the way I look at debt is like over the very long term, time and inflation eat away the value of debt. Let's say you finish your accumulation and you finish with a $3 million cash flow portfolio. Let's say that's 4 or 5 cash flow deals, right? And you've got $1 million worth of debt left on it. That's a 33% LVR. 33% LVR. Most people listening to this podcast, myself included, on my current portfolio anyway, be pretty happy with a 33% LVR.
100%.
Most people would, right? But $1 million worth of debt, $1 million is a lot of money. But 33% LVR, you're probably sitting on a portfolio that size. You're well over 100,000. You should be well over 100,000 net passive on a portfolio of that size. If you've gone through debt reduction and they're the deals, you're probably up maybe even towards 150 grand depending on the deal. So I would 100% in that scenario, if I had to, all right, do I want to focus on paying this? The one thing I'll say is in that scenario, it depends on the goals and what Big Matty's actually chasing. But in that scenario, 100%, I would always leave a certain level of debt. Even if you say you chop that down to 20% LVR, you go, no, you know what? My goal is 20% LVR. That's 600 grand. 600 grand's a lot of money. Paying that out takes a long time. All right, there might be an extra 2 bread and butters that go through a cycle and you pay a bit of CGT and you wipe them out. But why not just get that to the point where you pay that down to the 600? So long term, like it's amazing because we will carry a certain level of debt that one day will mean almost nothing. And what I mean by that is like you think about what our parents bought homes for 30 years ago and what they're worth today. You know, it's an 80% LVR on a 100 grand property 30 years ago. The property's probably worth $1 million now, you know? So, but still, if they carried that 80% LVR, that's 80,000 on $1 million. It's an 8% LVR. And as time and growth compounds and rental growth compounds your portfolio, it becomes a smaller and smaller number. There will be one time in the not too distant future that $1 million isn't that much money. Even these days, it's not that much money anymore. It is a lot of money, but it's not like
it wasn't what it used to be.
$1 million 10, 20 years ago, talking about being a millionaire was crazy. These days, it's like, it's a great achievement, but I feel like 10 million is a new million in terms of like, I want to be a millionaire, or you want to be a 10 millionaire, because a 10 million is a massive achievement. These days, it's still a great achievement, but it's not an almost incomprehensible figure.
Because of inflation.
Because of inflation, 100%, man. And so, mate, 100%. And that's why it is so important. And literally, that is why all economies have inflation, because it erodes government debt, it erodes everyone's debt. Over time, it makes everyone wealthy. And that is the whole point of it. And so 100%, it's a great question. Mate, I would always factor in leaving a certain amount of debt left on your portfolio. And then over time, it will become null and void and barely anything overall anyway. So 100%, it's a great question, and 100% I would be leaving it as well.
And also, just so Matty understands, at that point, his loan, so his passive income is going to be servicing his debt. His loans are going to be principal and interest at that point as well, right?
Kind of depends, man. Kind of depends.
But at that back end, right?
Yeah, if you want to,
it's slowly going to be ticking over.
Yeah, paying itself off.
Yeah. You're going to have your cash flow. So even though it might be a psychological thing of trying to be debt free, it was always our parents debt free.
Debt free on a primary residence, I think, is a different story.
Because
and so I understand that, for obvious reasons. But like debt free on the portfolio, it's an extra $1 million to pay off. Is probably another cycle of three or four, let's call it 3 good solid growth properties going through a full cycle, which might be another 5 or 7 years, or you can just walk away now and be, whatever its kind of interest rates at the time, will be 50, 60 grand a year, which yes, it is a lot, but you're probably sitting at 150K plus still. So yeah, man, I'm a firm believer. Leave a certain level of it on.
It takes the pressure off too for people to 100%. Think they have to clear off every cent of debt.
I actually had a strategy with a client about this yesterday, and they're like, the goal strategy, and they had a pretty advanced portfolio, and they're like, by the time we finished, we're working it all out. It was about over an hour of strategy, and when we got to the very end of it, we're going through the final debt reduction piece, and they were in their early 50s, and they were talking about wanting to retire by 60. There's a certain amount of passive income they were chasing, and I'm like, you guys will not. It is almost too much to try and achieve this. You will have to really, really run hard to do the extra. Essentially, it was 4 properties to kind of get where they're chasing. And I'm like, the better option here is leave $1 million off. Let's focus on paying down the 2.1, 2.2 mil, and let's just leave it kind of from there and leave the $1 million worth of debt. Because the size of the portfolio they were building anyway, it was tiny in the scheme of things.
Yeah, wow. That's a really important point, Sammy. Well done.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there you go, Matty J. Moving on to question number 4. This is from Jack W. Big Jack. Sam.
Jacko.
From your experience, how do your dual income deals perform for vals down the track for equity releases? I think you started to talk about this, so we'll pressure you there again, Sammy, to find out.
Press on, Jimmy.
Do you prefer not to pull equity from your cash flow deals? Okay. So how do they val up?
Yeah.
Is essentially for equity releases from your dual income, your manufactured cash flow?
Let's answer that first. So valing up always depends on the location and how many comparables they have. So I remember in Southeast Queensland, you would remember this well also, we had some deals, and Big Nick Wilcox, who's been on multiple times before, we did deals and the grannies would val up 80, 100, some of them valed up 150 grand up. And then we started doing them in WA. Obviously, we can say that now, but we started doing them in WA, and some of them were coming in 50 to 100 grand short. Why? And this is pre-build. So this is a pre-build stage, right? The biggest reason for Queensland was there's so many comparables, and we're buying really well, and we did some accelerated strategies, and we're building well and all the rest of it. But the value was there because of the comparable sales that were there. There was enough there that we could justify what. And we literally weren't even putting figures on them. The banks were coming back and telling us they were full vals coming back at that money. But when we went into WA, they were nowhere, none of them, and they sold so infrequently. And when they went to sell, there was a funny thing. We kind of it was a little bit of a catch-22 because we'd buy some of these things off market through our agent connections, and the agents wouldn't know what to sell them for. So if they had a 4x2 with a 2x1 granny, they'd sell it for the same money as a 6x3, and so we'd pick up this steal of a granny deal, but then it'd stuff all our vals.
Oh, of course.
And so it wasn't ideal, but it was one of those things, and we just started telling people, especially early, we were just kind of telling people, look, vals do come in short in WA. We've witnessed it a lot. And it was funny because we'd have people, you would have done this yourself. You've done deals in Queensland and seen the uplift on vals, and then you kind of almost come over and expect to see the same thing. And it's a very, very different ball game. So it really depends on location. Like I'm obviously talking, Brisbane compared to Perth. But then there's all the regional locations and other capital cities and whatnot. So it always comes down to the area. So some will value really, really well. Some will value poorly. And then sometimes it can really depend how it's finished off and then what it's leasing for. So a lot of the time when it's a finished product and the value, you can walk through it and you go, here are my 2 leases. And they go, all right, shit, well, this thing isn't renting for 500 a week, it's renting for 800 a week. I can't value this thing at 500 anymore, or at 400 anymore, or whatever.
Correct.
So that's kind of a little bit of a way around it, but you might need to cover a shortfall in the upfront, if that makes sense.
And putting some exact examples to that, further to just using my own experience for you, Jack. So the first couple of deals I did with you, Sammy, the high cash flow deals in Brisbane.
Yes.
We revalued them within, I don't know, 6 months or 12 months, pulled out all the money that I put in, right? Now I'm going through a refinance to go again to pull out more equity because they're valued up each time.
Yes.
A classic example in Brisbane. Same thing in WA, that one particular property we tried to do, the bank said no. You're going to have to come up with 50%. You're going to have to put in 100 grand.
Yeah,
or something.
they valued the granny 50% short.
That's right. And then I thought, well, understanding the strategy and listening to everything that you've said and your guidance, let's not do that. Let's pivot. Let's park that. Reinvest that capital that you're going to do somewhere else.
Because the timing for that was perfect because you were like, what should I do? Should I build the granny or should I acquire a couple more properties? And that's when I slapped you in the head about the bread and butters. I was like, man, we need to load up on some bread and butters. And aren't you glad you did?
100%.
How much are they up? And that's the thing. It's always an opportunity cost. Like, what do you need to do in your portfolio? And the opportunity cost might be the opportunities that we need to miss out on a location because we need to take 6-12 months off to build a granny or 2 grannies at the moment to boost that cash flow to keep moving forward. And that's why everyone's portfolio is different and building it is always different on that front when they need to inject those sort of deals in and keep moving forward. And that's fine. That's part of it. But yeah, man, understanding that this is part of the puzzle and it's not always pure, clean angel skies. You know what I mean? Everything works out perfectly. There will be times where a valuation will come in short. I remember there's a young, I'm going off topic here, but there was a young lady who's going to be on the potty in a couple of months, I think it is actually. And the first one she bought with us, it was a great deal. It was a cracker, but it just wouldn't val up. And it was 12 months that this thing would not val up. Yeah, and we could see it. And she's going, Sammy, I don't know what to do because the value, I can see it's worth like 400. We paid 260. And then like a year later, it was probably worth like very high 300s. And they're still valuing it at like 280, 290. And she's like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, just be patient. I think I was at Val 3, which was at 9 months. Wow. And then at 12 months, it valued at 400.
You just have to wait.
But then the funny thing was she pulled it out and then bought one for, I can't even remember the exact number of that one, but that one valued up 100 grand up in 3 months. And she's like, what the hell? Like, it's just like, you know what I mean? Like, it's always case by case, and it just depends. Sometimes it can depend on the value you get on the time and how they view it and the comps that maybe come through. But it was just we kept getting stuck with these average valuers on the first ones who were just like trying to cover their ass and valuing super low. So yeah, man, it can be. And we tried challenging and everything, and that's why. And now she's on to she's bought her third one, and now she's already rolling into 4. But she just had to go through that little bit of being like, all right, didn't val, I'll just reval. Didn't val, reval, bang, came off. So.
And just going back to what we've said at the start, understanding what you need. Like we buy the bread and butter deals to recycle equity, to form your deposit, to go again. So 100%. Understanding, even though the cash flow deals are in those same markets, they might not reval. That's why you need your bread and butter. I learned that the hard way. And so from the sound of things, Jack, he doesn't have enough bread and butter deals in his portfolio potentially.
What's the second part of his question?
Well, do you prefer not to pull equity from your cash flow deals if you didn't have to?
It always depends. I mean, if you didn't have to, no, of course not, because it keeps your cash flow stronger. But it always depends where you are in your portfolio. If you're in accumulation, when I was in accumulation, I was valuing everything. Didn't matter cash flow, bread and butter, anything. I was valuing you. I always came in short. But you know what I mean? You're valuing everything. You're in accumulation.
One good line.
You need to get as much money as you can 100%. In accumulation. You 100%. Want to keep moving forward. So if anything, it's kind of one of those examples of if I can pull cash out, this thing's positive, so it's not going to impact my ability to keep borrowing. So it's always case by case. But in accumulation, you should be always trying to get it. And maybe when you start going through consolidation, no, we're not going to tap it at that point.
All right.
And keep moving forward.
Hey, I'm loving this podcast, by the way. The cash flow.
The cash flow specific.
I love it.
I'm liking it. I'm liking it.
This one's from Kevin, our next question. Hey, Sammy boy and Jimmy the Grizzled Silver Dog. Did you put that in? No. You bloody did. You're a dick. Hope you're well and had a good break. The question from Kevin07.
Be careful.
The average person seems to have a target of 100K passive in 5 to 10 years. Can an average person achieve 200 to 250 passive in the same time frame, Sammy boy? If so, what would they have to do to achieve it? Okay. To give you context, Kevin has been investing with the APS team for a year and a half. He has 5 rental properties and he's building 2 granny flats and he has a primary place of residence.
Yeah.
So,
I know Big Kev well.
So let's go back to that question. Most people, the 100K is the milestone for most people. Let's just give ourselves 10 years, right?
Yep.
Can the average person do 200 to 250?
They can. It always depends on the individual. So when it comes down to income goals, it comes down to the individual and their starting point, where they're starting from. With Kevin, he definitely can. I know his personal situation, and I know how hard he's willing to push. You see, he's done 5 properties. He's building 2 rentals.
Hard.
He's about to get to 7 rental properties in an 18-month window, right? Great result. If you've got that mentality and that mindset, and you've also got the ability from a borrowing and an equity position as well, you can almost achieve anything, right? So you can push. You look at what I achieved in a 10-year and then a 15, 14-year window to kind of get where I am now. I never really had a right to do what I did in property. Anyone can kind of push to anything. An average person from a standing start hitting $200,000, average position.
You mean like 80 grand salary?
Yeah, that's not going to happen in that time frame, right? But it's all relevant to the individual. How much time do we have? How much income do we have? How much deposit do we have? Let's create a game plan around that to keep moving forward. But the biggest thing where I see people fail here is then they decide, I'm going to get sidetracked by this, or I'm going to go travel here, or I'm going to go buy a new car, get married, kids, all these different things, which are life decisions. But what it really comes down to is if that is your goal, that is what you have to stay committed to financially. It doesn't mean you can't go do those other things, but at what budget do you need to do them at? And at what level do you need to do them at? And do you need to do them all in 1 year? Or can you break each one of those things up into different years? And where I see people really, really succeed at this, and Kevin is one of these guys. You look at that portfolio he's built from a standing start in a couple of years. He's committed. He followed. We have strategy sessions. Sammy, what should I do? This is what you do. Perfect. Pre-approval. Equity release. Bang. Next deal. Pushing it through like that. And looking at the portfolio like a business and continuing to build it. Anything is possible. But it all comes down to how committed you are with it. People love to say on a discovery call, on a strategy call, yeah, man, I'm fully committed to this. I'm going to do it. In the next 5 years, I'm going to go as hard as I can. They do the first deal, the second deal. They get knocked a little bit by a few things that might come through with it. Maybe a valuation doesn't come in at 100 grand over in the first 3 months. And they're like, oh, this doesn't work or whatever. Like, it's sticking to the game plan. You know, you look at that example before of Ella and what she did and still going through and pulling that equity out and just sticking with it, knowing that it was worth more but couldn't get it. She couldn't do anything else. She wasn't saving enough money. But when the opportunity came, she pulled it out and then went again and then got the results. It's not getting sidetracked. It's staying completely focused on the goal. If that is your goal, it's to double it. It's to do 200, 250, not 100. Then make that your goal, create a game plan around it, and then execute on it. It's as simple as that. Is that achievable? 100%. Can the average Australian achieve it? In a 5-year window is the only questionable part of it, because 5 years is fast. Property isn't an overnight success. It takes time, have cycles, have rental growth, have all the rest of it, execute on strategies. But you put a little bit longer on it, and something like a 10-year on that figure, and definitely it is possible. It all comes down to commitment. And this is what I see. You see a lot of people get G'd up at the start and they buy it and they got to deal with property managers and the brokers and the settlement and a little bit of trade, maintenance here and there. And they get sidetracked or they get, disheartened or whatever. It's one of those things like you go through, and this is why I always talk about different levels of investor. Because when you get to a level, let's say a level 15 or 20 investor, that stuff doesn't even knock them. It's just part of the journey. They're doing this and it's not knocking them. A level 1 is kind of like, and that's why it's leveling up. Because then you get to level 2 and it's not as bumpy. And then 3 and then 4 and it's like a slower trajectory, but it's still moving. And then you start getting to double digits and it starts moving on that trajectory. But you have to keep doing it to get better and better and keep moving and moving. And that's why I think they have to just stay completely focused to this thing. If you stay completely focused, any Australian on any income in almost any scenario can achieve this thing. But it's sticking at it and keeping on doing it. Sticking to the goal, not getting sidetracked, being committed to it. What you got to remember, Jimmy, 200 grand a year is a lot of money. Yeah. You have to be a professional that's pretty good at what you do or work your absolute ass off to make 200 grand a year. But people want to get it in passive income for the rest of their life. And they don't think they have to bust their ass and go out of their way and put the balls on the line and all the rest of it to get there. The amount of things you do have to do to get to $200,000 passive in 10 years, let alone 5, is immense. It is not an overnight thing. It would be, a solid 7 to 10 years of good, solid determination to get there to achieve an income like that. Does that make sense?
Mate, I love that. I just thought I'd let you. You were on
Let
a
me
bit of a
rant?
you,
Yeah,
yeah.
roll.
You were on it. You were charging through. You had someone in your sights, and you were on the attack. I think the thing.
Sorry, mate.
No, I was just going to say the thing I love about when I look at your portfolio, and we talk to people about what you've achieved, and you've done incredibly well in 15 years.
Thank you, mate.
And I'd love for you to correct me if I have this wrong, but I say to people, whether you want 50 properties or 5 properties, the strategy is exactly the same. It's the ability to scale and continue to build out. And most people, if you said to them, I'm going to give you a $30 million portfolio, they'll go, bring it on. Yes. Hold on. But you have to get into debt for, I don't know, what, 15 mil? I don't know what it did. But let's just call it 10 to 15. Yeah, 15 mil.
Yeah.
Whoa. Hold on. Give me the first half.
Or you want that in let's say in 10, 15, in the time frame I did it in, right, in 14 years. You want that. You cannot travel for 7 years in it.
Yeah.
You have to drive an old shitbox. You have to work multiple jobs. All the sacrifices. Start stacking up all
7
the
days.
sacrifices.
Yeah.
And that's why most people don't need to build a portfolio that big. But especially if we're talking about like a 200 grand portfolio, you might be talking a 10, 12 property portfolio. You're not shooting, you're not going crazy. You know what I mean? Like that's a manageable number, in my opinion, for everyone out there.
Yeah. So it's the scale. It's a game of scale, and you've said it so many times on the podcast: the consistent accumulation, and not buying 1 or 2, and then thinking, oh yeah, no, I'll just put the queue in the rack for the next 5 years. And the exercise that I love to do with people is go, okay, so let's just say we bought 2 properties. Let's fast forward what that looks like in 10 years or 20 years. And when they do the dots, they go, well, we're not going to have enough. Exactly. So this is the game plan that we need to adopt. And having a strategy, which is what your whole focus is, starting with a clear strategy, is going to make sure you get there.
Yeah.
This
100%.
doesn't just happen.
You want to achieve these sort of goals, guys, the consistent accumulation is absolutely key. But like the strategies you set up, especially if you guys are working with us as well, like a huge amount of our listeners work with Australian Property Scout. The strategy that we build out, it is sticking to that thing. So if we talk about consistent accumulation, 2 deals a year, how do I do 2 deals a year no matter what? Because in 5 years, you've built the 10 property portfolio. Let it run another 5 years. Everything's probably gone through a doubling cycle. All your cash flow deals are probably now at 15% yields or 12, 13% yields instead of 7 or 8s when we did them. And the whole compounding effect of the whole portfolio has taken off. And in today's dollars, you're probably in the 10-year window sitting on 150 to 200,000 net passive. If that is your strategy, or if that is what we worked out, or if that's what's possible, as a minimum, that's what you want to do as a minimum. Because the consistent accumulation and continually putting those properties in the portfolio is going to deliver more than anything else, more than trying to get a bachelor's in being the best property investor in the world and consuming all the content in the world. Just execute. Execute at a high level, and the heavy lifting of the market, buying the right deal, the right property, right location, right price, that will do the heavy lifting for you, and you will learn it as you go. And that's why the deal is so crucial, but the actual execution of it, making sure you're doing it, is equally as important.
And the irony of all of that, Sammy boy, is people don't even need to execute it themselves. I'm baffled. Like for me,
if you got someone doing it for you and they're literally covering their fee, where is the loss? Covering their fee or more, where are you losing that scenario?
People think we might be pushing the APS, and in terms of buyer's agent, but I'm speaking from a client who pays a fee and engages you.
Yeah, no discounts.
And the only way I've been able to accumulate the properties was getting you to do it.
Yeah.
Because if I was going to do like 1 property a year as an individual person, for me, I'm like, that's too much work. I've got too much shit going on. Whereas if I'm saying to you, I'm getting the broker to get the finance, I'm going to you saying, deliver me an outcome. 1 a year is so conservative.
Yeah, 100%.
So there's no excuses.
Yeah.
If you're outsourcing someone to do that part and the market's doing the heavy lifting, what are you waiting for?
But if you're also assisting with the strategy and then going, all right, well, this is how we go through. We release this and then we move into this market. Okay, well, this is coming up with finance, so we need to put this deal in and everything as well. There is no excuse because everything is being taken care of someone that is far beyond you as a level of investor. The fastest way to fast track anything you want to do is engage someone better than you at it. or it's like a coach, right? So like, yeah, I mean, I have the same thing in business. You have the same thing in soccer. You have the same thing as a PT. Have the same thing, anything you want to get better at, copy someone or work with someone that is better than you at it and has done it for longer than you. That guarantees your success.
Someone
as close
out there,
as possible.
Just being, and we're going to wrap this question up, but they might be saying, Sammy, it sounds too good to be true. I'm just playing devil's advocate. What would you say to that?
Mate, the amount of people that jump on the Trustpilot and they go, it can't be that good. It can't be that good, And like realistically, mate, we do this day in, day out. The whole reason I did this was I got burnt back in the day by someone that didn't have a moral compass and had no ethics. And that's why I got into this game and into this business. And we are so committed to helping people get to that level as well.
Okay.
It is too good to be true. It happens.
Beautiful.
It is happening.
We've got one.
Ask Big Kev.
We've got one final question from Johnson. And I might just skip the question that I was going to ask you because I 3 years ago when I started working with you, actually, I got to say, I got to do it quick because I said to Sammy, Sammy said these cash flow deals, it's going to make this amount of money, and I'm like, okay, sign me up for two. And so we did the cash flow deal, and at the end of the cash flow deal, I was like, Robbo, there's no cash. Where's the cash?
And then Robbo called me and goes,
hey, Sammy, and my mate Jimmy, he said to me, where's the cash?
So can you explain to people that usually in the first year or so, or as you're building out your portfolio, the high cash flow deals, and you touched on this at the start, it's not you're going to be making 5 or 10 or 15 and pulling that money out to go on a holiday and it's going to fund your lifestyle. It's more around the bank weighing up your scenario. Weighing up all your income, all your expenses, and allowing you to continue, further to the other question, continual accumulation. Can you just go into that a little bit more for people, just so they frame their expectations?
Yeah, 100%. So like, even in that scenario back then, which is a lot better than the scenario that it is today, because today the interest rates are so high, the cash flow is so minimal in terms of like when you first set up a cash flow deal. We might be sitting at these examples before, $5,000 a year net passive, 5, 10 grand or whatever. When we were doing your deals, most of them were 15 to 20.
15 was minimum.
Minimum, and some of them were like stretching into the high 20s. Like they were ridiculous. But the simple thing is when you look at this thing is it isn't to fund a lifestyle yet. When you get that thing down to, we're talking about LVRs before, 20, 30% LVR, and you've got all your cash flow deals down to a 20, 30% LVR, mad. That's when we need to properly assess it and go, all right, how much income do we actually have coming in from this portfolio? Because this is the stage where we want it to be producing. That's what I say to a lot of people when I talk about cash flows and stuff. Run that cash flow deal, drop the LVR down to 20, 30%. Let's have a look what it looks like. That's where it starts getting real juicy. You start talking 30, 35, 40 grand a year plus passive income. That is where we want to get it to. But right now, we just need it for the oxygen. It's the lifeblood of the portfolio.
Serviceability.
Servicing. That's exactly it. So regardless of whether it was back in the day at 20 grand or it's now when it's 5 or 8 or whatever it is, it's in the portfolio for the banks to continue to like you and lend you money. In accumulation phase, I never worry about what's this deal producing, what's that deal producing, what is it overall. Yes, I want to know from a performance perspective of that property, but I'm not looking at it going, well, that thing's a piece of shit because it's only giving me $5,000 a year or 10 grand a year positive. I just did a cash flow deal. It took me 9, 12 months or whatever to fully execute the entire thing. I want more. That is not the purpose of that deal. The purpose of that deal was to allow you to keep moving forward in the portfolio. And so that's the biggest thing, man. Like you got to have a really good look and understanding of the portfolio. And again, as you level up as an investor, that was back when you were a level negative 42 investor. When you called me with that, well, you called Robbo, and then Robbo had to call me because you were so unhappy. Big Robbo, shout out to Robbo, we love you. But that is like the level of investor back then. You didn't understand it, right? But again, leaning on an investor that's obviously a lot more years in the game than you, you started to understand, okay, this starts to make sense because it's going to allow me to retain servicing to keep moving forward. That actually makes sense because this is the portfolio I'm trying to build. I'm not trying to get the cash flow now.
And also, if your growth properties in this current environment are slightly negative, we are trying to balance out that portfolio to continue. So you are 100%. Balancing out the scale, so to speak.
Definitely.
All right, there you go, Sammy. We've got to the final question.
Beautiful.
This has been a juicy Q&A. I hope you've been enjoying it, folks.
Mate, looks like we're going to wrap up
this
within
is
an
from
hour.
Johnson. It's a bit of a multi-question, so don't get upset, right?
Multi, TAB, how many?
And Johnson's actually said, I have a call booked in with APS where I was going to raise these, but thought I'd ask here and get the big dog, the bull shark, to answer the questions himself. So, first question. in this current market,
Yes.
are you still able to execute cash flow deals for 550K?
Yes.
Question number 2, are you finding, even with APS's economies of scale, contacts, you're finding it difficult to execute builds, manufactured cash flow deals due to trade shortages?
It is definitely a slower process. So
you're not a miracle worker, is that what you're saying?
Mate, we can't control trade shortages. We can't control material shortages, right? So it's just I literally spoke about this at the start of the potty. Is that different builders? All builders are impacted by this at the moment. Many builders have actually gone under in the last few years, and all builders have been slowed down substantially. So yes, when we used to build grannies in, you used to be able to build grannies in 3-4 months. Now it's taking potentially 6 to 8 months, depending on where you're building. It can be taking longer. But it doesn't mean you're still getting a great quality product at the end. It's just in the environment we're in right now, it's taking a little bit longer than it used to.
Sammy, 12 months that you're going to keep for the next 40 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Big deal. It's important, right?
100%.
Next question. On average, how many manufactured cash flow deals in an area do you do at the same time to get the benefits of scale, i.e. pricing, with the trades?
He's loving talking about scale, isn't he? I think he's looking for a discount.
Maybe.
Is his last name Ibrahim? No discounts to Ibrahim's. Robbo, you get one.
That's a bit racist. Go on. So on average, how many manufactured cash flow deals in an area do you do at the same time to get the benefits of scale?
It really depends on the area. Depends on the area, depends what we're doing, depends how lucrative the cash flow deals are in an area as well. We had
supply and demand too, and vacancy rates of rents. And there's a lot of variables.
It always depends. But like what we do, we do cash flow deals in high growth locations, right? So when we're in an area specifically for growth, we tack on the additional strategy of doing cash flow in that area as well. So obviously we double down on our contacts and who we have there. So we build a lot of connections with everyone that we work with in an area. We're always able to get quite sharp pricing. But again, it's the environment we're in right now. It's not like you're building a 3-bedroom house for $3,000 anymore. Those days are gone.
Anon John, he just called me in on my headpiece and said, Sammy, are you flooding these areas with your dog boxes out the back? And are you is there ever an oversupply of stock that you might flood an area?
No,
is what the objective person might be thinking.
So the biggest issue with us and I say this as the reason why we would never be able to flood an area is because we always still buy extremely strong, like well-priced properties, right? So we're not just going and buying a property and paying an extra $50,000 for it or paying market value because we can build a granny on it. We're still buying a good quality property. We're getting a discount. We're still going through all the same normal parameters. Yeah, your discounts on your cash flow deals aren't as big, typically as say like a trademark deal at APS. But we're still looking to get a good deal on it because a lot of time you need the good deal and you need the cheaper price point to be able to get the yield to make it stack. So yeah, if we didn't care about discounts and didn't care about getting a great deal and getting the strongest and best yield for our clients, yes, potentially you could flood an area. But for us, no, we're always looking for very strong rents. We're looking to make a little bit of margin on the way in as well. And when that is in the equation, you can't really flood an area because it's not like you can go in and buy 100 of those properties in 6 months, a year, whatever. You can't, but there's not 100 of those at that sort of pricing with that sort of setup potential on them.
Okay. Final question from our good man Johnson. I'm going to read this out. It's quite a long one, so hold your hat. I don't believe in ghosts, Sammy.
Okay.
But would rather not meet one to find out. His question is, what's your data view on the 18.6-year bogeyman? Are you seeing credit inflating the market too much that it's now just speculation and will burst in 3 years' time? I know you touched on it a bit in the pizza, must have been the pizza podcast, he's saying. And true that Phil's work, Phil Anderson, is based on the US market. But Phil also stated this happened in the
on a first-name basis.
That it happened in the UK as researched by Fred Harrison, good old Frederick.
Freddie.
And tells readers to look at that book rather than repeat Fred's work in his own book. So basically, he's saying the 18.6 years property cycle. Do you believe in it?
Oh,
sorry. And Phil Anderson, it happened in the UK, not only the US, Sammy. Is it going to happen here?
Mate, you put me to sleep with the length of that question.
Well, mate, it's not me. You don't be bagging out good old Jono.
Mate, he's gone for 4 questions. I am going to bag him out.
He actually hasn't even signed on yet.
Oh, fuck him then.
No, we love your question, Jono. So come on, give him what he wants.
Mate, I think basing something on like a perfect cycle coming around at a certain time based on, certain parameters. I did a study on this, funnily enough, with a property economist, not by the name of Lukey Chusen, so someone else that's very deep in the game.
It was smarter.
It was a couple of years ago. A bit smarter, a bit leaner. Probably not as handsome as Big Lukey.
Not as nice as the big
nice
teddy bear.
Mate, I just... It baffles me that people, I know people are talking about selling out before 2026 because this huge impending crash is coming. Whenever anyone's done that, and especially because they base it on the American markets and everything as well, they're not the same markets. We have a very different appetite for risk, like in terms of the banks do. So we're a much more regulated banking industry than over there as well. So I've literally spoken about this multiple times in terms of this cycle, and it is a foreign study on a foreign market. And yeah, I personally am not going to be, selling down a large portion of my portfolio to preempt this this thing. It's a very, very good way of selling books and spreading fear and uncertainty, and selling this book and this idea and getting booked on stages and all the rest of it to talk about how the market's going to crash everywhere in the world at this exact point. But you look at Australia, and all right, maybe he's talking 18.6 years on from the GFC back in 2007 and 2008. Did the Australian housing market crash? No. Did the share market and the stock market, which is a global thing and which it was heavily tied to, obviously America and Lehman Brothers, all these huge companies go under? Yes. Was that America? Yes. Did the American housing market take a massive dive in a lot of parts? Yes. Did Australia? No.
So it's hard to see the economics of the Australian property market to justify that.
We have such a different economy to anyone else in the world. Like you look at our resources, our agriculture, like everything that we do. We're such a standalone sort of country with what we do as well. And I think we're so insulated. But the other big thing is, man, like I know we sing the super boom. We love the super boom. So many people in the potty community loves the super boom, concept and what we talk about it. But the key messages within Superboom and why we honestly believe one's coming is, we're in it right now, and that it's going to be an extended boom. Yeah, 100%. It is due to housing shortage and migration and like all these other things that's like, for a housing market to crash, there has to be a glut. There has to be an issue with credit, which I know he's mentioned, but it's a huge amount of people defaulting on their loans. Now, the way that the Australian credit system works and the banking regulators and everything is they obviously take a huge amount of, like they do your DTI, like your debt to income ratios. What can you actually afford? The vast majority of home ownership in Australia is debt-free primary residences, followed by debt-induced primary residences. Then there's a small portion at the very bottom, which is rental properties and investment properties. So if the vast majority and the vast bulk of the market is owner-occupied stock, and a large portion of that is debt-free, where is our exposure? I hear what he's saying, like a little bit on some fronts, and like some of it does stack up and add up, like from some of it. But I just think there's too much overwhelming
data, like the economics of it.
So many points in my mind. Data, yeah, is obviously one of, but it's just so many facets and points that just like shoot it down in my mind from the Australian perspective.
Well, the caveat is no one predicted COVID, so who knows? I mean, there might be some 1 in 100 year event that comes.
But he's talking about one in every 18.6 years.
Yeah.
How do you time the market to an 18.6 years? I don't believe in it. I don't.
So like no boogeyman.
No boogeyman. No boogeyman.
No boogeyman.
Not
here,
in the property
Johnson.
market. Maybe under Jimmy's bed tonight.
Maybe. I am staying at your house, so I don't know.
I am going to scare the shit out of you.
Okay. Sammy, I think you've done very, very well.
Jimmy, absolute pleasure as always.
Can I just say, if the listeners enjoyed that themed Q&A, please write in and mention Jimmy's expertise. It'd be nice to get a bit of love.
We want to know, guys. Let us know. Write in either on the socials or at the bloody support emails or the rest of it that's in the show notes of this episode. If you enjoyed the themed Q&As and if you would like to continue to hear them, make sure you write in, you let us know, and write in your questions, other things you want answered as well. Obviously, the Q&As, guys, you guys get your questions answered direct by us. So make sure you're sending them in, and we'll keep pumping them out monthly for you. Jimmy, any final notes, my friend?
Mate, I think that was great. great to be back up here and can't wait for the next.
Likewise, big fella, mate. Great having you up here. Listeners, I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you took any great value out of it, make sure you please leave us a 5-star review if you haven't yet and a testimonial. And if you think there's anyone else out there in your circle that could take some great value out of this episode, make sure you send it on to them so that they can also benefit and join in the community of what we're trying to build here. Make sure you're jumping on, you're following us, guys, at Australian Property Scout on all the socials as well. Make sure you're getting your property fix. Obviously, these potties are just a portion of what we're putting out consistently on the platforms as well. Otherwise, guys, always great having you on board, listening in, and that is another Scouting Australia podcast.